Right. Well, we're starting now then. And the very first thing I want to do is to thank you, Sue, first of all, for inviting me, because I don't often get an opportunity to speak. So this is, if you like, a chance to really express what I want to say about grandfather. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. But mostly, can I thank all the people who are listening to this video recording, because you are participating in it. It's through your participation right now in this event, as we're all together here, that's creating a sense of occasion for me, which is helping me to bring this forward, the sense of participation. And it's that idea of participation which grandfather was so keen on, and which we'll be exploring through grandfather's book, The Year Participated, which is his paraphrase of the Calendar of the Soul. And because this is an Easter series, we thought we'd start with that book. But before I get there, I'm going to say a little bit about grandfather Owen Barfield, and I'll also say a little bit about my involvement and how I started to get involved in grandfather's work. So grandfather Owen Barfield, sometimes known as the first and last Inkling, the Inklings being some Christian authors who were based around the town of Oxford and the University of Oxford. And he's the first and last because he was so long-lived. He was the first to publish and the last to publish. He lived 99 years, and he really lived his life in three parts. The first part, the first almost 33 years, he was a sort of poet, author. The middle part, he was family man and lawyer. And in the last part, he was sort of a visiting professor, teacher, almost equal parts in all of those. And I think that grandfather really brought the Inkling impulse into his atmosphere or the environment in Oxford. But his first Inkling moment, if you like, was as a schoolboy, aged 15 at Highgate School. He was sat in a Latin class, and the boy next to him was his best friend, Cecil Harwood. And Cecil Harwood was translating Latin out loud. And there was something in the translation, the formula of the words, that really gave grandfather an idea, which he would later develop up in terms of his book, Poetic Diction. And together, those two friends met and attended talks given by Rudolf Steiner around about 1923, 22, 23. And very soon, they became founding members of the Anthroposophical Society of Great Britain. And it didn't take them long to be committee members. And both of these two friends were committee members for 46 years each. Cecil Harwood started earlier, grandfather 2 years later, but grandfather finished 2 years later. So grandfather's years were 1930 to 1976. So if you think of everything that happened in the society, in the Anthroposophic Society in Great Britain, between 1930 and 1976, grandfather was on the committee for all that time. Now, there are many, many sort of parallels in the lives of these two friends, which I could pick on. I could, for example, say that they both married women who were substantially older themselves, but I won't say anything about that. What I will say is they were both known by their middle name. So grandfather's name is Arthur Owen Barfield, and Cecil's name is Alfred Cecil. It's interesting that they're both going by their middle names. It's also interesting this other name that they have, that they attach their first name. So I really think it's appropriate that the kind of imagery of Arthur and the Grail quest and the kingdom of Arthur is associated with grandfather. It has the same right kind of connotations. Owen is a variation of John, and grandfather very much identified with John. Alfred is the king, the defender, the sort of the English king, if you like, very appropriate for Cecil. And I think grandfather sort of saw in his friend a kind of characteristics of almost St. John the Apostle, the rock. And he alludes to those sort of things in a novella that he wrote called Night Operation. Anyway, these two friends went to Oxford together, and very soon in their first term, they were introduced to another young man called C.S. Lewis, because, you know, they were kind of poets together. It's in that first phase of life when grandfather considered himself a poet. And the three of them became great friends. They were introduced by an anthroposophist called Leo Baker. And one of the characteristics they did together as friends is go on long walks. And they were also joined on their long walks by another anthroposophist called Fields. Can't remember what his first name is, but something Fields, Walter Fields, I think. Anyway, what I'm trying to allude to here is that C.S. Lewis was kind of surrounded by anthroposophy. You know, his best friends were anthroposophists. When he died, his literary executors were Cecil and Owen Barfield, and he said that his most trusted friends were sort of Owen Barfield and Cecil Harwood. Now, probably since C.S. Lewis died, maybe 10,000 books have been written by him, but only a handful, if any, have sort of alluded to that link to grandfather and anthroposophy and what anthroposophy meant to him. So I think there really is a research opportunity to sort of work back and understand what C.S. Lewis was saying in the light of reading Barfield and knowing something about anthroposophy. Now, into this group, Tolkien was introduced quite early on, and grandfather met Tolkien at the Inkling meetings in Oxford. But what Tolkien particularly did was join them on their long Easter walks, which I've just referred to. It was the kind of walking and talking activity that they liked. And again, many books have been written by Tolkien, a little bit more kind of understanding that grandfather did influence Tolkien has appeared in some of those books. There's more of an acknowledgement of it. And some anthroposophists have sort of said, I'm sure that Tolkien knew about anthroposophy. Some of the things he's saying are so anthroposophic. Well, he did, because, you know, grandfather told him about anthroposophy. So yes, you're right in picking up on that. That is thanks to grandfather. But we don't have to go too far. We can actually look at what Tolkien himself said. So Tolkien gave himself the project of writing a fictional Inkling encounter, which he called the Norton Club Papers. Now, this never got finished and never got published, but he did start writing in it. And all the characters in the Inkling group were kind of represented. And one of the characters he wrote up was a character called Ranulph Steiner, who was clearly an allusion to Rudolf Steiner, or at the very least, Owen Barfield, representing Rudolf Steiner within that group. So a little bit about me. I'm an only grandchild. Grandfather was 28. I was 28 years old when grandfather passed away, and I knew him well. I enjoyed visiting him. I actually enjoyed visiting him so much that from the age of 14, I insisted on going by myself. So my parents would go one weekend and I'd go the alternative weekend, because I actually preferred just spending all that time with him. But for me, he was just grandfather. He didn't really say very much about other compartments in his life. I was still in that kind of family compartment of his. As I say, I was 28 years old when he was died, and then I was just busy getting on with a little regular life and family life. And I found myself, age 33, having a very strong mystical experience, which I just couldn't shake off. It was just really knocked me for six. And I thought, you know, this has got to mean something. There's got to be something behind this. And I somehow felt it was connected to grandfather, so it didn't involve grandfather. And I started asking questions, you know, what's happened to grandfather's work? Who's looking after it? Who's responsible for it? Because although I was grandfather's executor with my father, grandfather had appointed 4 literary executors, and my father, who had taken the lead in this, had just passed everything over to the literary executors. So we were not involved at all as a family. But of course, grandfather had lived so long that his literary executors, were quite elderly by then, and not very much was happening. So it sort of took me about 3 years to get to know them, track them down, and get them to trust me enough that one by one, eventually they'd step down, and I was appointed the literary trustee, the literary executor. And really for the last 16 years or so, that's been my vocation. So I've been working on it as a vocation for 16 years. But I'm not alone. You know, I'm very helpfully supported and by some wonderful people, particularly the Hippolito family, Gabriel Schenk, Rory O'Connor, Simon Blackslander Lange, and the Taylors. These are all people that in one way or another have really supported me and encouraged me in doing this work. Now, I'd been doing this for about 7 years or so, and I'd sort of read his books and sort of kind of started to republish his books, but I didn't really understand what grandfather was talking. I didn't really understand his philosophy. And it's strange, it had been a 7-year period, you know, exactly one of those periods of time, 7 years. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? Should I just read the book again? But then I might just not understand it again. You know, there's got to be something else to do. So I thought, well, what did grandfather say? You know, maybe there's some clues in what grandfather told me. And so I sort of searched my memory to see what grandfather said. And he said nothing, nothing helpful at all, nothing that I could use. So I said, well, maybe he didn't say anything. Maybe he did something. Maybe there's some clues in what he did. I said, well, what did he do? And I remembered that he had given me a book. So I went to my bookshelf, looked for the book, and the book was this book, which is called The Year Participated, first edition. So I looked inside, and it says, "For Owen, with love from Owen, April 1986." And I would have been 16 years old then. Curious, that number 16 years old, you know, coming up again. Anyway, I thought, well, maybe that's the sort of place to start. Looking at this book since grandfather gave it to me. What is this book, The Calendar of the Soul? And so my quest kind of started to get a little bit deeper from that moment on. And a few things occurred to me as I decided to sort of work through the Calendar of the Soul in a week-by-week basis based on the week that we were in. And the first thing is that I started in November, and November is the month of grandfather's birth. So I had a sense from him in this November period, thinking about him, that he was in some kind of way closest to us in November, or closest to me in November, which is entirely appropriate because we celebrate All Souls, and it's really when that veil between our lives and the other life is easiest to sort of move across. The other thing I noticed is that I was reading it in the correct order. I hadn't really appreciated this, but the weeks that I was reading it tied up with the weeks that Rudolf Steiner had written it in. And so I was reading it correctly, as it were. I wasn't having to make any adjustments for any of the weeks being out of sync. And the other thing I realized is that there was a diagram in the book. And that Calendar of the Soul, grandfather's version, has been republished as this edition. And I'm glad to say that in this edition, there's also the diagram represented. And because I like diagrams more than words in some ways, I thought, well, this means something. I sort of spent more time looking at the diagram than the words. And I came up with my own diagram where I thought it could be kind of updated, which has been shared and has been shown around, can be seen on the website, and maybe we could share it at the end. But there is a diagram that I produced. But I went straight to the diagram without doing much reading around the subject. But I have subsequently read around the subject. I know it's a very complicated subject. There's lots of interrelated connections, and Carl Koning I'm sort of familiar with. So, you know, I am aware of all that, but I don't want to go into that kind of explanation. I want instead to sort of have more of a kind of personal reaction to it, and go back to that relationship with grandfather and what I could sort of take from that. And occasionally when I was speaking to grandfather, he would come up with phrases like, I'm a Victorian, you know, I was born in the reign of Queen Victoria, something like that. And at the time, I didn't really know why he would say things like that, because, you know, is he saying that he's an old man? But he didn't like seem like an old man. He had a very youthful spirit. He didn't seem old, and it's kind of self-obvious that, you know, people are, why say that? And it's now thinking back on it that I think his theme has been and always was the evolution of consciousness. So he was working through the evolution of consciousness. as it relates to the spiritual world, but as it relates to our physical world as well. That was his theme. And I think what he's trying to say there is that he was a person of a particular time. The place is similar. So we were both born in London. We both went to the same school, but his time was different. My time was different. I was born in the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. I got a different perspective. And he's sort of saying just as time and consciousness evolves in our plane, it does in the spiritual plane as well. So what happened in the spirit world 50, 100 years ago is sort of different to what's happening now. And that kind of, I think there's a sort of an awareness that he had and that he's given to me. Now, for anyone that's interested, that is one of the main things that he debated with C.S. Lewis. And that was the core of what they called the Great Debate. And C.S. Lewis said, no, things don't change in the spiritual world, whereas grandfather said they did. Anyway, that's for other people to discuss. But I do think that if you put both arguments fairly and squarely and clearly explained to people nowadays, I think they would side more with grandfather. They would see what grandfather's saying, more so than in the past, if you like. But of course, C.S. Lewis was writing for an audience of the past, Britain in the 1940s and 50s, and what he was saying was appropriate to them then. So I'm quite interested in contemporary anthroposophic authors, and have been reading quite a few, and I'm going to name two. One is Are Sorensen in Norway, and the other one is Adrian Anderson in Australia. Now, both of these people are saying very much the kind of things I think grandfather would be saying, or certainly would be happy that they are saying. Neither of them know of grandfather's work, but because they're contemporary, I was able to reach out and speak to both of them. I have asked them both whether they know of each other, and they don't know of each other. So they're both at opposite ends of the world, northern Norway, southern Australia. They're both saying very similar things. They both don't know about each other, and I feel that there's kind of a process of proof by doing that. They're kind of proving that they're on a correct track by saying the things that are saying in isolation, if you like. So some of what I'm going to be referring to is in Adrian Anderson's book, Live in a Spiritual Year, which was republished in 2016. And I've been amazed at how much has really been coming out in the last 15 years or so. I mean, I feel that my own experience ties in with this, but I think a lot of change, a lot of opening is happening in the spiritual world, which is allowing for not just clairvoyance, but a sort of a depth and a detail of clairvoyance that just wasn't there before. So yeah, that's quite an interesting area to explore as well. Anyway, getting back onto the theme, which is the year participated, and because we're approaching Easter or in the Easter week, let's start with Easter. And Easter is, of course, a 3-day commemoration of death and rebirth. But humanity, or the spiritual people aware of humanity, have always kind of known this. This is a pre-Christian commemoration. It used to be a kind of initiation process as well. And the time that's most appropriate for it is autumn, because autumn is when we can most feel that kind of death and rebirth process. But anyway, after the Christian period, it was moved, that 3-day commemoration was moved to this Easter period for a couple of reasons. One is because it tied up with the sort of narrative of the historical events of the actual crucifixion. And also because the Christian authorities wanted the main Christian festival to coincide or to match the main previous pagan festival, so that if you like, they were married together. And of course, in English, we use the word Easter, which refers to a sort of pagan Teutonic goddess, but it has references. It has the same root interest word as East. So when we say Easter, we are implying a sort of an eastward awareness, or an eastward glance, or a look towards the eastern rising sun. So that kind of evidence in the words used is what grandfather used when he was putting his case together for the evolution of consciousness. He was using and arguing through the use of words in that way. Now, Easter, of course, is related to the spring equinox, and the spring equinox is a tipping point. It's when there's more daylight than nighttime in our day, in our 24 hours. And it's very interesting that all the kind of Abrahamic religions have a period of Lent in this kind of moment, in this quarter of the year. There's kind of a withdrawal, a Lenten period, an understanding that there's a need to sort of fast or to withdraw from the material world in this period of time. And Adrian Anderson explains that that's because in the run-up to the equinox, so just before the equinox, when the dark is diminishing, if you like, it's when the adversarial beings are most active. They're strongest, most dangerous, most active. It's kind of the dying, sort of flailing around of elemental beings. Anyway, there's the most harm, and having awareness of this harm could help us. And I just happened to notice that in the last few years, COVID was announced in this period. The Ukraine war was announced in this period. People I know had cancer in this period. I was looking at nature and I saw some, the kind of the worst kind of insects are around in this period. There's all sorts of kind of, bad things happening in this period. And I think if just more people were aware of it, if you told this to half the population, I think, maybe half the population would actually withdraw and take a Lenten sort of fast more seriously. Anyway, we're moving from Easter towards summer, and 40 days after Easter, we have Ascension Day. So it's still ruled by where Easter falls because it's 40 days after. But bear in mind that Ascension Day is implied in the name, is this idea of rising up, this kind of outwardness of the ascension, a going upwards. Okay, so just hold that in your mind, because we're coming round on the calendar to summer now, and we're particularly looking at the summer solstice, which is the longest day, midsummer, also known as St. John's Day. Now, on this diagram which grandfather produced, at that top there, he describes it as dream. And it's appropriate to call it dream because it's kind of a world equivalent of when we sleep. When we sleep, we go into a dream state, and our dream state is an expansion into the astral realm. Well, the planet also has a sort of expansion into the astral world, a dream state. And just as it's easiest for us to engage in the cosmic divine world when we're asleep, same with the planet Earth. It's when it has its engagement with the cosmic. So it's the moment at midsummer when the cosmic sun logos has the greatest ability to unite with the planet Earth. So if there's going to be a kind of a unity, it's in that moment. And the active part of it, so grandfather had a lot of talk about active passive, the polarity, which he gets from Coleridge, but the implication is that active goodness is most active, it's called Christos. It comes in this moment of midsummer through the baptism of Christ, and that's what I think we know we're talking about here, but it's just appropriate to the season. And talking about our feelings in the season, look at all the festivals, look at our behaviors in summer. It's much easier for us to have relationships, to meet people, to go out. We don't need to be prompted so much. We're quite free and easy. It's much easier to have engagements between ourselves. It's equally easy for the sort of cosmic to have an engagement with this planet. Anyway, following summer, we're moving towards the autumn or fall, and after that bliss of summer, there's a sort of contraction towards what in winter grandfather will name as self. So on that diagram, there's self at the bottom of the diagram. And there's a movement towards a greater awareness of the ego, with our sense of self develops, and that sense of community, if you like, or kind of that dream state diminishes. And we reach the autumn equinox, which is a tipping point, and going back with more darkness than lightness there. And we call that St. Michael's Day. Now, this idea of St. Michael is important, and the imagery of St. Michael that it entails is important, because after the summer, with that kind of ascension and the expansion, what's built up, it's not just good things that ascend, it's also demonic things that ascend. And what's built up in the atmosphere is a kind of elements of sulfur, a sulfuric kind of element. And that needs to be countered by a cosmic iron. Iron, of course, implies strength and has an echo of blood. And the sulfur has always been associated with the demonic. So you have this idea of sulfur having to be defeated by iron, which if you take that back to the imagery that we have of St. Michael, it's St. Michael fighting or slaying the dragon, the serpent, the sulfur, if you like. Now, this is really quite complicated. You have to go elsewhere for more detail about it. But Grandfather understood this and explained it, and even used it in one of his novellas, Eager Spring, where he's using this same imagery of cosmic iron defeating the sulfur dragon. These are kind of a theme, if you like. And it's kind of interesting that all Catholic masses, you know, for most of 2000 years, always made an appeal, ended the mass with an appeal to St. Michael, the Archangel St. Michael. But after the Second Vatican Council, that stopped, that no longer happened. And in popular culture, the imagery of St. Michael's certainly dropped out of sort of common parlance. And although it might be controversial to say it, that might be appropriate. You know, there might be a reason why that is, because some of these authors are arguing that St. Michael has, if you like, been promoted. He's moved up a hierarchy. He's no longer an archangel. He's moving up towards other hierarchies. And another archangel is moving in to take his place, which is why I say this is a moment of transition in the kind of cosmic hierarchies. And the name of that archangel is Vidar, a Nordic god. But I think it possibly known by other names in other cultures, but that really hasn't been explored very much until now, if you like. And again, talking about how we feel in autumn, well, autumn's a sort of a very good time to take a pilgrimage. So not just because the weather's right for it, it's not too hot, not too cold, but that is the time to find ourselves, which is why people go on pilgrimages. So autumn's always historically been a time of pilgrimage. It's a time of finding yourself, and it's an appropriate time for that. And that all relates to the ego manifesting itself, coming through, freeing itself from the dream state. And we're moving over to winter. In winter, we have the winter solstice, and there's a relationship between the winter solstice and the spring solstice. And that is that 3 days after both solstice, we have a kind of a significant occurrence. So in spring, after the spring, after the spring equinox, I should say, 3 days later, we have the Feast of Annunciation, which is kind of pronunciation of the logos. So where the logos kind of is spoken into incarnation. And then now, 3 days after the winter solstice, is when we actually have the birth of that logos. You know, there's this imagery of birth imagery. And we call that Christmas. That's the name we've given it, Christmas. But it's more of a period. It's not just 1 day. It's the holy nights of Christmas, sort of ending with Epiphany, sort of on the 13th day, 12 nights or so. And this is really when we can find the light in the darkness. So it's a sort of moment of shining from the center. And this is why we have a lot of sort of festivals of light in this period of time. Many cultures have a kind of festival of light, of celebration. And it's absolutely typical with this sort of esoteric reality of things, which is when it would be easiest for us to find the Christ child, we are most distracted by kind of society and cultural customs. So we are most distracted at Christmas at that very time when it would be absolutely easiest for us to have an encounter with the Christ. So these are the sort of dilemmas that seers and searchers have to encounter. Anyway, there's a sort of imagery for Christmas which I particularly like, and it's the imagery of a very early medieval statue of Mother and Child, the Madonna and Child. And I suspect you could probably know what I'm referring to, where the Madonna is quite a large queen-like figure, and right in the center of her lap, there's a sort of mini man who's dressed more like a king than a child, and they're both sort of blessing us. Well, this to me is a kind of imagery of Christmas, a correct imagery. So you have a Christ-like figure at the core of an earth-like figure. So there's a sort of correctness to that, which I feel comfortable with. And there's also another thing that I've always struggled with, which is, why do the Orthodox religions celebrate their Christmas just after our Epiphany? You know, this is the period of time. You'd have thought that after such a long period of time, you know, people could have worked out the Christmas day. And my feeling about that is that really what we're talking about is a Christmas period. So it's all one long day, and it's bookmarked by these two Christmas days. So they're both correct. They're not wrong Christmas days, they're right Christmas days. And the period between is one long Christmas day. So when we think about that, what happens sort of right in the middle of it is we have our New Year's, and there's a sort of echo of New Year's resolution, which is where we sort of with our ego state, try to do some good for the new year. So all this is kind of a sense of our ego having a feel for striving towards goodness, towards a sort of higher self and a new self. So there's a slight echo, even in contemporary culture, of this understanding of this period. So it's when the ego can exercise its will with greatest strength to see that spiritual reality of the birth of Christ. And then we move back towards Easter, and of course the year spiritually ends at Easter, and this is reflected in great world religions and traditions, particularly the Persian and the Hindu traditions. Their New Year's always start and end in this Easter spring equinox period, and that's absolutely correct for a cultural epoch. But there is a little bit of an echo of that in the United Kingdom, Britain, because only here in the United Kingdom does the financial year begin on the 6th of April. No other country anywhere has a financial year that starts on the 6th of April. And that's a real sort of heart back, a calling back to this reality of a spiritual world starting round about this time, 7th of April, which is when we're starting, as we read in the calendar of the soul. And only here in England do we still have a kind of an echo of that we can relate to. And there's a quality of Englishness about that, which was recognized by Rudolf Steiner. I mean, he came to England in a sort of disproportionate amount of times. I think he thought it's through England and Englishness that his message would get out more into the world. And he was probably right about that. And that was also picked up by grandfather and Cecil, and they communicated that back into the Inklings. So the Inklings themselves have got this kind of Englishness about them, and grandfather's known as the Inklings Inkling. So there's a connection back that way. And I'll just say a few words about the calendar of the soul, which is that it starts on the 7th of April, and that's, if you like, the most kind of correct, balanced time to start the calendar of the soul. But because it's a flexible starting date every year, the first quarter and the last quarter has to be, if you like, adjusted to match that flexibility. So the way I approach it is by if I'm going to do it in any particular year, I just look at the calendar and I see how many weeks I've got, and I just try, if there's 3 verses but 2 weeks. I just try and balance them out, because the important thing is the relationship from one verse to another, not so much the specific dates that they're said on, but it's the relationship between them. And in a sense, that process, that exercise of making an adjustment refreshes the year for us each time, so that every year becomes kind of a renewal or a refreshed year. We're not just looking at it again. I do that in pencil at the top of the canon of the soul, then I rub it out and sort of readjust it. And it's only for half the year you have to do that. The other half is fixed, so it's not such a task on us. So there you have it. That's as far as I wanted to say at this stage, and I'm sorry I kind of galloped through it, but I'm happy to discuss any subject really about grandfather that I'd be able to answer you on, or have more of a discussion about how we really feel our way into the year and the year participated.